In 2016, Stamkos was the league's most sought-after free agent on the market, and similar to Tavares, Stammer's hometown team was interested in acquiring him. Stamkos would ultimately decide to stay in Tampa, and it's turned out to be alright for him. But what if Stamkos hopped in his pajamas and signed with Toronto that year? Well, let's get into it. Before we begin our timeline, I want to point out a few things. 1. This is out of pure fun. Moves that were made were heavily thought up due to the cap issues and the cap itself. 2. We tried to make this as realistic as possible, doing as much research as we possibly could. And 3. We tried not to go over the top. We highlighted what we felt was most important. And finally, huge shout out to capfriendly.com for making this happen. This website was a big help in helping determine what moves could actually be made. So now, let's get in. This is where we'll begin our timeline. The Leafs still acquire Anderson at the draft, and Austin Matthews still gets drafted first overall by the Leafs, so nothing changes there. The young trio stays intact for now. But that offseason, Steven Stamkos was up for grabs. So everyone thought. Stamkos would eventually sign with Tampa and stay put, but his hometown team in Toronto was making a push for him. So, in this timeline, we're gonna say Stamkos signs with Toronto. It was reported that Stamkos wanted about $14 million from the Leafs, but he signs for 8.5 in Tampa, so we're gonna say he signs for 8.5 in this timeline as well. The Leafs would make the playoffs this year as the second wildcard team, and that still seems realistic, so nothing really changes. Except, we'll say that the Leafs force a game 7 against the Caps instead of going out in 6. So now for Tampa Bay, losing Stamkos means that the Bolts plummet standing-wise, missing out on the playoffs by a way larger margin, finishing with about 81 points, falling 6th in the division. So Tampa will get pick 10, and Florida will get pick 14. Swapping draft choices, meaning Tippett goes to Tampa and Foot goes to Florida. That's all for year 1. In free agency that year, Marleau won't sign with Toronto. Instead, he'll sign a 1-year deal to return to San Jose, reuniting with Joe Thornton. Tampa, in now dire need of offense, will sign Alexander Radulov, meaning Dallas will sign Yakupov instead of Colorado on a 1-year prove-it deal. Headed into the season, Toronto shows signs of immense promise, dominating the first half of the season. Tampa continues to struggle, and Marleau and Thornton together will help San Jose point-wise. Toronto, instead of becoming 3rd in the Atlantic, will now win the division, and Tampa will miss out again on the postseason. San Jose stays the same standing-wise, and the playoffs are completely different now, as Toronto will play New Jersey and Florida will now play Boston. Toronto will meet Boston in round 2 this time, but will fall short. Boston will face Washington in the Eastern Conference Final, where Washington still prevails. San Jose still gets booted by the Golden Knights, however, and the outcome remains the same. Now, this is where everything changes. JVR and Bozak still leave for Philadelphia and St. Louis, but the Tavares sweepstakes completely changes. Since Toronto has Stamkos, they won't be interested in Tavares, meaning the top suitors are now San Jose, Tampa Bay, and the New York Islanders. We know that the Sharks offered him a $12 million offer, but it's unknown what Tampa offered Tavares. So, the Sharks now get John Tavares, but due to cap restraints, they don't acquire Erik Karlsson. Instead, it was also rumored that Karlsson could head to Vancouver, so that's where he goes. We're gonna base the trade off the Sharks trade, so Karlsson gets traded alongside of Francis Perron for a 2020 first round pick, 2019 second round pick, Olli Levy, Jake Virtanen, and Adam Gaudette. Nylander signs before training camp to his deal he has now, so this makes for a completely different season. With the addition of Karlsson and the outburst of Pettersson, the Canucks will only miss out on the wildcard spot by a few points. The Leafs clinch the Atlantic once again, and the Sharks clinch the Pacific instead of the Calgary Flames. The Lightning miss the playoffs again, but are beginning to get better. Since the Leafs clinch first place, the Canadiens clinch 3rd in the division, but will lose to Boston. Toronto defeats Columbus in 6 and then defeats Boston in 7. They reached the Eastern Conference Final against the surprise Hurricanes, where they would advance to the Stanley Cup Final. In the West, the Sharks now play the Avalanche and beat them, and Calgary, now playing the Vegas Golden Knights, defeat them. The Sharks take down Calgary to face St. Louis in the Western Conference Final. The Sharks defeat the Blues to face off against the Leafs in the Stanley Cup Final, and in 7 games, the Toronto Maple Leafs capture their first Stanley Cup since the 1960s. Stamkos and Matthews are Stanley Cup champions. The Leafs still make the moves they have been making, acquiring Ceci, Barrie, Spezza, and Kerfoot, and they are still somehow able to sign Marner. The Sharks still have the cap space to spare as well, actually being able to keep Braun and sign Thornton to a 1-year extension. The Lightning, well, are a mess, but still have cap space to spare, and as for Vancouver, they're still able to acquire Ferland and Miller, and we're still able to ink Beagle and Roussel in 2018. Eriksson and Sutter are placed on the LTIR to preserve cap space as Karlsson signs his current deal in Vancouver. Besser takes a pay cut as well. This is where our timeline ends. As we've established before, one move can change the course of an entire reality. Imagine if Stamkos left Tampa, the impact he'd leave on the franchise, and the one he'd leave in Toronto. Imagine if Tavares landed in San Jose instead of Toronto. What reactions would be received? Would Islanders fans react the same way? And what if those moves forced Karlsson into Vancouver? Will the Canucks be off for the better or for worse? It's fun to speculate and fun to question these things, because like we've showcased today, one trade, signing, or selection can alter a team's entire future for better or for worse.